Stop me if you've heard this one. Modern feminism has gone too far. I supported feminism when it was about equality, but now it's all about hating men and falsely accusing them and taking all their money. It's this demonization of men that I can't support. And this is the narrative pushed by misogynists desperate to rebrand as egalitarians. That they don't oppose feminism or equality. It's simply that the modern form of it has gone too far, swinging the pendulum the other way and now actively oppressing men. But as always, it's not true. And that's highlighted by an article I came across by Joe Interrante, a notable LGBTQ+ community activist who headed Nashville's largest HIV charity for 25 years. And he wrote about the men's movement back as it was in 1981. And he describes the two directions of the men's movement. There were those men who supported radical feminist issues. They saw male privilege as a social issue, linked to reproductive rights, the right to choose, and bodily autonomy, to lesbian and gay rights, violence against women, to racism, classism, and imperialism, all of which were part of the work of deconstructing masculinity. In the other direction were the free men, who viewed masculinity through the lens of the individual. And they responded to feminism's critique of male dominance by ignoring it completely to point out all the ways in which sometimes individual men were disadvantaged. And Interrante points to Robert Sides, the director of Free Men Boston's open letter, to illustrate the point. It is oppressive to hear of universal female powerlessness while seeing the ubiquity of women's studies, bookstore sections, theatre art shows, health centres. It is not a little ironic too to hear of women's second-class status when they have such privilege in divorce settlements, custody hearings, the draft, statutory grape laws, escheal harassment, and lifeboat seat allocations. This is straight out of any red pill comment section. And this was 1981. Keep in mind that marital grape was still legal. Women's right to open a bank account and wife beating as a serious topic were less than a decade old, as was no-fault divorce in most states. The reason for women's advantage in divorce settlements was down to a husband's adultery or abuse, and men's rights campaigners were still complaining that this was unfair. And all this cements the distinction between feminism, which sought to free women from the oppression of patriarchy, and men's rights groups, which, as Interrante points out, wanted to absolve men of the responsibilities of patriarchy. And Sides continues, complaining that women don't hit on men. Just ask yourself how many assertive women came up to meet you last year versus, if you're single, how many you had to approach. It's bad enough not to meet many assertive women. It's worse to meet so many that feminists never mention, who ignore or act crudely towards men who must approach them if anyone is to get their needs met, who don't care what pressures privileged men are under to earn money just so long as they spend it on them, who are intimate only if prompted by booze or bennies, to avoid responsibility and blame men for taking advantage of them. Pausing here for a quick history lesson, the bennies that he's referring to are benzodiazepines, such as Valium, Xanax, and Klonopin. See, back in the 60s, barbiturates and amphetamines were regularly prescribed to unruly housewives who were engaging in dangerous behavior, such as not wanting to cook, struggling to look after the kids, and most importantly, not putting out. By the 70s, this led to an overdose crisis costing a lot of lives. Benzodiazepines such as Valium and Serax were seen as safer alternatives. You can't set her free from the housework, but you can tranquilize her so she complains less. Give her Valium, it'll make her less of a bee. By 1979, 15% of the US adult population were taking Valium alone. Barbiturates, methamphetamines, and benzodiazepines are now considered highly addictive, controlled substances. And yet here were men's rights advocates like Robert Sides complaining that after decades of doping wives in order to sleep with them, being told not to do that was an outrageous and egregious example of female privilege. Which is wild! Another article from 1979 by Richard Haddad, one of the founders of the men's movement, has all the greatest hits. He argues that he was a feminist, but saw one example of a man being discriminated against and was done, concluding that men as a class do not oppress women as a class. Instead, that men and women have cooperated in the development of social roles that are psychologically lethal to men. Men do not dominate society and do not enjoy a life of privilege, since men are more prone to antisocial behaviors like crime and substance abuse. And in fact, if you go to a bookstore, you won't find any feminist books that acknowledge men's issues, so checkmate feminists. But at the same time, since the subject of the men's movement is men, we don't acknowledge any women's issues. It's depressing that in some 40+ years the men's movement hasn't moved at all. But it's also not surprising. The original free men groups became the National Congress for Men. It's the same old groups repeating the same old arguments, but rewriting history and trying to claim they only oppose modern feminism. So no, they would have never supported feminism or equality because they never did. They simply missed the days when women were tranquilized into oblivion.